welcome everybody to the first live episode of the Business Unusual interview series. I'm so glad that you're here. My name is Jessa Lux, and I'm the host, and I'm also the community manager for a digital design agency called Click Studios. And Click makes websites, software, and apps for our clients. And today, I'm excited to be joined by Dr. Koen Pauwels. Dr. Pauwels has a PhD in marketing, and he's a distinguished professor in marketing at Northeastern University. Dr. Pauwels, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today and to talk to the rest of us.
Thank you very much for having me, Jessa.
And because this is our first live interview, I would encourage anybody here to put questions that you have that come up for Dr. Pauwels in the chat, and I can address those as we go, or there will be a couple of minutes at the end to address those as well. And this is a 20 to 30 minute interview, so that can kind of set the expectation for how much time we'll be here. But Dr. Pauwels, you wrote an article earlier this year for Harvard Business Review. It's called "Don't Cut Your Marketing Budget in a Recession." And can you just briefly summarize that for us to set the stage for this conversation?
Yeah, I'm glad to. So what we see in a recession, this one and the past ones, is that lots of companies just cut their marketing budget as a knee-jerk reaction. And so the title should really be "Don't Cut Your Marketing Budget by Default." Because what we talk about in the article is that your situation as a company will differ from your competitors. And so just like in life and in sailing, for instance, sometimes it's good for your competitive advantage if you do something different from what your competitors are doing. So the whole article is a call to kind of stop and think, really examine where you should spend more, spend less at, and of course, very importantly, how you should address the situation. And then from this analysis of the situation of your company in your industry, you should make much wiser decisions.
I'm so glad that you mentioned where you should be spending the money, because that's my biggest question. So in a recession, how should we think about where to dedicate our marketing dollars or where not to?
Well, I mean, they cut that out of the article, but I had a formula in there. It's a very simple one. So in my book, I talk about the simple formula that how much you should spend on marketing and where is simply a function of your expected gross margin and your advertising effectiveness. And so so most of the companies that I consult, that's what they want to know. Let's allocate, right? And it can be offline, online, it can be over products, over countries. And so what you do is you analyze in all of the situations you are, right? Where exactly you expect advertising effectiveness to go up, for instance. And I'll give you a typical example. So in 2008, I left the US to go back to the old world. I'm originally from Belgium. And so I was hired by university. It was a startup. I was the third faculty member, and it was started by the richest guy in the country. And then the recession came, 2008, 2009, and he's like, "Koen, you're my best paid marketing faculty. Tell me what to do." So he was in about 6 countries, about 6 different businesses, all the way from banking to apparel. And he said, "Well, what should I do?" And I'm like, "Here's the formula." And he's, "Koen, but we don't have any data. I mean, I believe you're mad, but I have no idea what my advertising effectiveness is." And I said, "No problem. Let's just think through it." And so where are the situations where you will basically have consumers more responsive to your marketing, and where are these consumers? And so we figured out, for instance, and this was a big apparel company in Russia at the time, that it was the perfect times to start spending because it was a mass market company. And before, all the expensive French and Italian brands were outspending them on TV. So they couldn't even buy TV time. Now, thanks to the recession, the competitors cut back and they could advertise on TV for the first time. Then the second thing was that, of course, their mass market kind of clothes were much more appealing to consumers in the recession than in the boom times in Moscow. And so we decided to double down on, for instance, that particular company, and to really cut back marketing in some other places where effectiveness was lower.
That makes sense. So what you're saying is the formula doesn't change, but where your marketing is most effective will change depending on the economy, and you need to use data to figure that out.
Exactly. And what I always begin with also in my book, kind of start with the vision. You can, with your industry knowledge, you can reason through these things, even if you don't have data. And that is really important. Because adding data to a well kind of thought through what we call a mental model works fantastically. So you and I, if we know the industry, we can talk reasonably about it, and then we know what to look for in the data. Then we are smart enough to know exactly what to ask of the data.
Okay, good. That's good to know, because I know there's varying levels of data competency kind of within the marketing world, and I'm sure for the people that are watching today. So being able to reason through it to an extent is helpful. What companies are you seeing doing this really well right now since the pandemic started?
So there's kind of, which companies are very data driven versus which companies kind of were able to change in a very agile way. Because that's the other thing, right? You can be paralyzed by analysis. You can spend so much time in the data that you forget that the data is only really there to help you make better decisions. So companies I see doing this very well, and this is across very different industries, right? I mean, you have Amazon as a retailer, you have Reckitt Bixer as the maker of Lysol, for instance. You have Singapore Airlines. So these are all companies that are very data driven, number one, that have the trust and also the competency, let's not forget that one, all the way to the top of the organization that people do demand data-driven arguments. And they also have the political will inside the organization to change their decisions based on data. And so that is something that I felt missing when I wrote the book in a lot of big companies. So I always love to consult smaller companies because they would actually take action once you convince them. In big companies, you often have the different silos. And so even if you can convince one part, the other part with no good, reasonable argument just to protect their turf are against that. So these are some companies that you may know that actually, despite being a big company, were able to really focus on the data and to make very quick changes and decisions based on it.
So being agile, being able to actually react to the data or information that you have is kind of key to being one of the companies that's performing best in good times or bad.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is that right? So that kind of brings me to a question that I've been excited to ask you since we scheduled this interview, just because of your breadth and depth of marketing knowledge. And it's kind of a broad question, but in good times or bad, what is the most common mistake that you see organizations making in terms of either their marketing efforts or their marketing budget?
The most common mistake is to take data as a given. And so this really changed, right? So when I started 25 years ago consulting companies, the big companies were drowning in data. The small companies didn't have enough data. Now even small companies are drowning in data. They get hundreds, thousands of metrics online, as you know. And so now the biggest mistake I see companies making is to just take the online metrics that they get for free and just pretend that these are KPIs. And so my book always says, start with your vision. As a company leader or as the marketing leader, what do you want to accomplish? Right? So even if it's simply less, I want sales, and then I need people to be aware of my product. I need them to consider it. And only when you have that one, now you can go to the metrics you have and say, well, do the metrics that I get, like engagement, followers, and so forth, do they map onto these objectives? And very often they don't. And so thinking with everything you know about your industry and your company and about how your consumers are, before you take it to, okay, which metrics do I now have, which data are now there, is for me the most important step. And the typical analogy is the drunk looking for his keys under the street lamps, right? You may have heard the story. So a police officer at night, he sees a drunken guy stumbling around and he's like, hey, I can't find my keys, I'll help you. And they look for a while under a street lamp, and the police officer says, well, sir, did you lose your keys here? How are you certain? And he's like, no, I lost it all the way over there. Why are we looking here then? Because there's light here. So simply because an online platform gives you metrics for free, that doesn't mean that these should be your KPIs. You shouldn't just look for the data where they are.
That is a great analogy. It makes me smile. It actually reminds me, I was talking to somebody who works for a nonprofit recently, and their goal was to increase website traffic. But when we talked a little bit more, what would really benefit their organization most is raising money. and website traffic doesn't necessarily translate to raising money. And I think we all can get sucked into that. Like, what's our engagement on social, but is that actually translating to the objectives that we have?
This is so true. Maybe if you allow me one more anecdote, right? So when I came to this ultimate country, which I won't name, I was hired by the same car company that also I consulted in the US. And they were like a top 10 car company, but they only had 1% market share in that country. But they were very proud. This was 2008 because they spent 30% of their full budget online. And so, as you know, I've been looking at online and offline effectiveness for a long time. And so typically you get great effectiveness online, but only up to a point. So they were like, no, we're gonna put our money where our mouth is, 30%. And they had the #1 automotive Facebook page of the country. And Facebook was very popular there. They got all the accolades, but they had declining market share. And I'm like, and they're like, can you help us? And I'm like, okay, so what do you really need to get a consumer in this country in your new car? And they said, a test drive. That's what we need. We need people to have test drives. And I'm like, have test drives increased at all with your success of your Facebook page? And they said, no. I'm like, well, obviously. And then we looked at the data and we saw, yes, there's no relationship between Facebook engagement, as they called it, and test drives. And then we could look deeper. Are these the wrong people that go there, right? Is the audience wrong? Are we messaging them in the wrong way? But simply kind of the aha that, hey, we need test drives, which they didn't need data to figure out. And then we brought it to the data and we showed that Facebook engagement didn't increase test drives for them. That was a major elevation for them.
That makes a lot of sense. So we're, in a lot of instances, we're just overcomplicating our jobs by letting this data influence us when it doesn't necessarily need to.
Yes, so data fits in your decision, right? So I always give us the advice, think about the decision that you're planning to make. And then based on that decision, which data would you ideally want? And then kind of how close is the data you have? And I'm borrowing that, of course, from Jeff Bezos, right? But also thinks about stuff as 1-door or 2-door decisions. So a lot of decisions you're making, you should really take care of making decisions, right? I'm the first person to say that. But some decisions, you shouldn't spend too much time. You don't have to spend 6 months to decide how you're going to respond to the pandemic, for instance. It's way too late. There's some things you can do, and if they don't work, you experiment and you can go back. So these kind of two-way doors, there's basically, you have to get much faster analysis done. Whereas the one-way door, should you kind of enter into a completely new country with a very different culture, should you go into a completely different product line, for those one-way decisions, you probably need to spend some more time in getting the data exactly right.
Got it. That makes sense. And nimble has kind of been a word of this time period for the company that I work for. So I'm glad that you're saying that being nimble does pay off, and kind of spending too much time on decisions doesn't necessarily benefit or have the reward of it's not more time is better decision necessarily.
Well, the question is always, how certain do you have to be, right? Do you really have to be 95% certain that the decision you're making is the right one? Or do you only have to be 80% or 70% certain? And in marketing, because marketing is the toughest job in any company, right? We are doing something for the outside world. Our success depends on how consumers are going to react, our competitors, what the pandemic is going to do. So it is the toughest thing to get right. And the most important thing for a company to get right, to get customers and to keep them. But we don't have to be 95% certain. With 70% of the certainty, as managers, we have to be able to make decisions.
And I'm glad you said that, because uncertainty is such a theme of what we're all experiencing right now, at work and not at work. What advice do you have for marketers during this pandemic in the midst of uncertainty? Well,
so first of all is, of course, to do the good old scenario planning. I mean, there's good, better, worse scenarios. And so I must say, as marketers, and this is maybe a very old criticism, right? We are so used to be champions in our company. I mean, we are the face of, spending a lot of opportunities, and I love this about marketing, but sometimes it stops us from seeing things that can go wrong. So in my marketing analytics classes, I always have a full week devoted to risk in marketing. So how do you recognize risk and uncertainty? How do you mitigate it? And how do you talk to finance to say, hey, finance people are typically pretty risk averse. How do we talk about the benefits of taking risks? So right now, we don't know exactly when we're going to go back to whatever the new normal is going to be. We don't know exactly how deep the recession is going to be. But we can have certain plans. And so one of the papers I wrote is, should you launch new products in a recession? And so we look at from 1945 till 2010, we look at products launched in a recession, and we do find, and this was really cool, that if you launch your products out in a recession, you have higher long-term success and survival chances than if you launch it in a boom time, which is really nice. But then, of course, we looked at the conditions. So the more severe the recession, the lower the success chances of your product. The more you time it closer to when the economy is picking up again, the higher the success chances. So we have very different kind of estimates for when it's going to happen. And of course, you should make a decent prediction for next year, but you should also be able to kind of switch in a very agile way if the directions are otherwise. So I think the time that we used to make these very elaborate plans for the next year in marketing, and typically in October of the previous year, and everybody was annoyed and it took 3-4 weeks. I think we should go much more to an agile spending adjustment during the year.
That makes sense. Do you think, is that, if you were running a marketing team, would you do a month-to-month review to check if you're on track and adjust as necessary, or is there no magic amount of time that you should be readjusting?
There's no magic. So it really depends on how turbulent your industry is. So here is what I do. So part of the book is making analytical dashboards. What does that mean? So you all know what a dashboard is by now. But I'm always a proponent of dashboards that are based on data and change with data. So whenever I go to a company, we look at how turbulent the industry is, and then we decide when we have to update stuff. So some stuff is discussed every week. So everybody has their own dashboard of how well they're doing. And every Monday morning when you sit together for an hour, you discuss these things. But other stuff changes much slower. So you discuss it only once a month. And then some other stuff you only discuss every 6 months. And I think that's important because we don't want to get people to be completely overwhelmed by metrics and just chasing whatever whatever metric is changing. So you do have to kind of make those decisions. I'll give you one more example, right? So the company I was working for was a Japanese manufacturer, so that's easy to narrow down, but it was not Toyota. And so we were running these very, very cool models to kind of justify how much we should spend. And our models were predicting sales very well. This was in the US. And then suddenly our models underpredicted. So the company sold a lot more than predicted. Why was this? Because there was a Toyota recall scandal. So their competitor was in problems. And so for no particular kind of benefit of their own, they started selling more cars. So what do? You right away adjust your sales forecast. But then you also now have to think about, oh, should we revise the model? Because we have certain offline and online advertising effectiveness. Is our advertising as a competitor of Toyota now going to be more or less effective because Toyota is in trouble? Are people still want to buy Japanese, but they want to buy a competitor of Toyota? Or do they have this halo kind of fear that all Japanese companies have some issues? And so we had to figure that out very quickly because something very unexpectedly happened. So that's some kind of defensibility. So even though we decided to only update the model structure, once every year or 2 years, we really had to adapt to something that was very unexpected.
Got it. You have made me want to make my absolute next step after this interview, going to buy your book. So will you tell us what the title of your book is, and if there's somewhere that you'd prefer for us to buy it?
So it's not the size of the date, it's how you use it. It's a very timeless title, but sometimes it doesn't go to people's spam filters. So the subtitle is Smarter Marketing with Analytics Dashboards. And so I really wrote it, and so you can find it on Amazon. It's not the size of the data, it's how you use it. I wrote it because I had been teaching marketing data-driven decision-making to managers for years. And I couldn't find one good book that explained everything from the beginning to the end. That was the case. So I'm like, well, let's just, let's write it myself. I also should mention that I put all of my academic research freely online. And that website is called marketingandmetrics.com. Very easy, marketingandmetrics.com. So all of the papers that I ever wrote and all of the insights are nicely organized by, the 4 Ps and everything. And so together with that and the book, I think there's a lot of information.
Amazing. That sounds like a lot of information. And I'm going to move that book to the top of my stack when I get it. I'm excited to read it. So we have less than 10 minutes now left, and it looks like a few questions have come in. So I'm going to switch over to those. I haven't read them yet, but let's see what people are asking. So Ted asks, current COVID conditions have a lot of uncertainty that are less predictable than ever, it feels. In other words, current data may not be reliable indicators. How should marketers change the data they are looking at? Should they change it? What are your thoughts on this?
That's a great question. So I'm in between. I'm in between the people that said nothing has changed and everything has changed. So obviously consumers' key motivations, the underlying psychology and sociology, we can learn a lot from the past. You can look back at how people have reacted to previous recessions, pandemics, and so forth. But there are some changes. I think the best bet, and I'm in lots of research to basically figure out which of the habits that we learned in the pandemic are going to be lasting and which not. So are you going to go back to the office? Are you still going to buy a lot online and so forth? And so a very relatively safe bet is to look at the trends before the pandemic. So what the pandemic has done, it has accelerated a lot of stuff that was already in place before. And my kind of best prediction is that will continue. So for instance, telemedicine is a great idea. So for years, doctors have tried to convince us not to go to their office with a little cough, but to do video conference with them. And nobody wanted to do it. No patient wanted it. So now we have experienced that and we realize that it's actually relatively okay. We will probably continue doing that. The same thing goes for online buying and a whole bunch of other stuff. Things that I'm less certain about is office life. To what extent do we miss office life and being in an office with lots of other people and the magic that happens there, which I really like? Or to what extent do we say, hey, we can all work from home? So that was not really a trend before the pandemic. So there's a lot more uncertainty in that one.
That makes sense. And it is hard to predict, but it's been fascinating to see how, like, for instance, this community that we're building was completely in person prior to the pandemic, and it has been incredible to bring it virtual and connect with people from all over the world, really. It just strengthened it. One other question that came in from Michael. He said, I noticed that you wrote about Colin Kaepernick and the Nike campaign. What's your opinion of this campaign now that we're a few years out?
Thank you. So yeah, that was my very first Harvard Business School case, right? I really enjoyed writing this. So I was checking lots of things. One of the things that fascinated me about this one and anything controversial that brands do is that if you look at online versus offline word of mouth, they typically go opposite. So when you do something that is, let's say, politically sensitive, online sentiment completely sinks. And you don't know, is that bots? Is that, a very small amount of people? Whereas offline sentiment very often goes up. And so the case has lots of data that goes either way. But I think overall it was a very good move for Nike. And so, when I discuss this in class, there's always some questions. Well, was this the best spokesperson? And from the other side, we love the cause, but Nike is a commercial company. Don't they exploit the cause by being there? So there's lots of side questions. And as you know, they followed up with Serena Williams a few months later. But I think it was a great way to get people to pay attention to Nike again and to really understand what the purpose was and what it stood for. So the fact that it was controversial was actually beneficial, I think, because it made people pay attention. Let me also
take that's interesting.
By Andrew, if I may, Jesse. So what are some differences between marketing in the States versus the EU and Belgium? And so I find that a fascinating one because in the book I talk about it. If you talk about dashboards, an American manager thinks about the dashboard like in a car. between 5 and 10 metrics at most, what I need to drive. A European thinks about the dashboard like a pilot has in an airplane, like 40, 50 metrics. So Europeans want to be as comprehensive as possible. I mean, you see that particularly in a country like Germany, where I love to work. In America, it's more like keep it simple. And so there are some differences in how many abstractions you can make. And I found that part fascinating.
That is really interesting, especially because we talked about like getting buried in data. So yeah, that's fascinating. So we are, if nobody has another question to add, we are kind of a perfect timing here. So Dr. Pauwels, you mentioned that you have your work online and we can find that. We know what your book is called. Is there anywhere else online that we can follow you or find you?
Yes, so I'm on Twitter now with my name, Professor Pauwels. So if you know how to spell my last name, you see that one. I'm on LinkedIn, also my name, and I have specialized Facebook pages too that talk about the book and that update you there. And you can also find, so I blog weekly, and it's either about something very current, like my blog today was about predicting the 2020 presidential election, so that's cool. And different, but I also kind of take my previous papers and put a newer spin on it and explain it to you in one page versus a whole article.
Amazing. I don't know how you have the time to do all of this, but I'm glad that you do because I'm excited to dig into it. And I will, of course, post this recording. I'll make notes of takeaways. I will link everything that you mentioned here, so it's just easy for people to get to those resources. But with that, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me again, just being receptive to my reach out to you. I appreciate it so much. And I feel more equipped as a marketer leaving this conversation. So I think it was a success.
Okay, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for letting your lux, right, your light shine into this these tough times.
Yes, of course. Thank you, and thank you everybody who attended.